it's going to become a major new theatre of warfare, which takes place in what we call the grey zone. This is the area before conflict, but never ever provokes a conflict unless they do something outrageous. But you saw with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline in the Baltic, these things are vulnerable. They can be blown up. I mean, if you look at the Snowden revelations, one of the things that he gave away is that the free world is able to tap into these cables and take intelligence out of them. That was very unfortunate. That was like telling Hitler, we've got the Enigma machine.
Now, the government has unveiled new plans for a high-tech Royal Naval force to defend undersea infrastructure from attack by submarines. Atlantic Bastion, as it is called, will use a combination of AI, aircraft, drones, warships and gliders to protect underwater cables and pipelines, which carry 99% of our supplies, including gas, electricity, oil and communications data. Let's speak now to Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, a former NATO commander and retired from the Royal Navy. Chris, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks very much for being with us. Look, you said something like Atlantic Bastion was needed 11 years ago. You wrote a book about it. What threats
I did. Yeah, it's called Superhighway. It was all about how interconnected our world is, particularly by submarine cables and infrastructure and things like that. And happily now somebody's done something about it. I even mentioned the technologies that we needed, but I'm afraid electoral systems are so slow, Hugo, that it takes this long to put it in place.
I mean, were the threats you foresaw then, very similar to the threats that we think we're facing now? Or have the threats changed in 11 years? Presumably we have more like kind of communications infrastructure running under the sea these days, and indeed a far more invasive enemy in the shape of Russia as well.
I'm sorry to say, Hugo, it's exactly the same.
Right.
We have our cables. 75% of the North Atlantic cables go through British and Irish waters. The Russian capability has been in place since the end of the Cold War. They have a specialist unit called Gugi. It's a series of mini submarines that can be attached to ships like the Yantar that we saw, the intelligence gathering vessel. They can also be attached to larger submarines as well. And they've been operating for the last 40 years against underwater infrastructure and seabed facilities. So the threat was always there. It was never seen as immediate. And I think the Russians have intensified their activities since the start of the Ukraine war, because it's their way of getting back at us for supporting Ukraine.
And look, what sort of technology would this use in our defence? Is this just sort of listening out for stuff, or is it combating it as well?
Well, that's yet to be defined. I should stress, Hugo, that this also takes into account trying to contain Russian submarines coming off the North Cape, from their bases at Murmansk and places like that. This is an echo of the Cold War. So it's not just about dealing with seabed infrastructure and attacks on that, but also to deal with very capable Russian submarines that can fire missiles against the United Kingdom, the same missiles, in fact, that are being fired against the Ukraine from Russian submarines. So we've got a real issue associated with dealing with those hypersonic and transonic missiles that they can fire. And it's something I was in the House of Lords about a month ago talking about this threat, and the fact that Ireland's neutrality, for example, is a real problem for us because we're having to look after their territorial seas, and yet we've got no early warning of any missiles that are fired from the west across Ireland into the United Kingdom. So we've got to get together with Ireland to sort this out, not just in terms of our infrastructure together. And Ireland's building a huge offshore wind and other sort of renewable infrastructure network. That's what's really changed, is the intensity of activity on the seabed and things like that. And what it's going to comprise is outstanding naval assets that we've got, frigates, submarines, and also aircraft from the Royal Air Force and Norwegian Air Force will be out there doing their stuff. But I think the real change is going to be in the provision of autonomous underwater and surface platforms that can actually do quite a lot of what I call the dull patrolling. So if you've got a pipeline, for example, you can have an autonomous vehicle. It's called a glider. You mentioned it in the introduction. It's a very low power thing that just cruises along at very slow speed, moves up and down like a bobby on the beat, and looks out for activity and listens for it as well.
And look, if there's stuff like this going on underwater, if there are like mini Russian subs that are attacking cables underwater, and we have our own, stuff down there combating them, is there a danger of them actually coming into conflict?
Oh yeah, I would think so. Bizarrely, a few years ago, you probably remember, Hugo, one of our ballistic missile submarines actually collided with a French missile submarine because they didn't know each other were there because they were so silent. So there's a real danger in this congested space that you are going to have traffic problems, rather like in air traffic, to tell you the truth. But bear in mind also that these mini subs are going to be looking for other submarines as well. There'll be Russian mini subs and submarines looking for our ballistic missile submarine that's on patrol, and also our nuclear submarines as well. I mean, one of the things I forecast 11 years ago was that, underwater would become the new battle space along with space. And one of the slogans I was using at the time is we need to think about warfare from the seabed to space.
And look, let's talk about the role of our allies here, because all these cables and all these pipelines and so on, they don't, they might come to us, but they all come from somewhere. As you mentioned, Norway is going to have some involvement in this. We're saying that perhaps there should be a bit more involvement from Ireland. Who else should be involved?
Well, I mean, I think, one of the things I was suggesting in the House of Lords is that we should conduct far more frequent NATO exercises to the west of Ireland, particularly in Ireland's economic zone, to show presence, but also to sweep through the area and make sure it's not being interfered with or, mapped out by Russian submarine activity and things like that. I mean, the Irish are really sensitive about this sort of thing. They hold their neutrality quite close. But the trouble is, in a world like this, you can't be a conscientious objector. Most countries that are neutral, like Switzerland and used to be Finland, used to be neutral, very heavily armed. You can't just sit there and say, well, we're not playing or we're not paying for this. They need to take part. But, the rest of the NATO allies, I think, will take part. The European Union's going to take an interest, I think, particularly given the Russian intensity of attack in the Baltic and places like that. So it's going to become a major new theatre of warfare, which takes place in what we call the grey zone. This is the area before conflict, but never ever provokes a conflict unless they do something outrageous. But you saw with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline in the Baltic, these things are vulnerable. They can be blown up. I mean, if you look at the Snowden revelations, one of the things that he gave away is that the free world is able to tap into these cables and take intelligence out of them. That was very unfortunate. That was like telling Hitler, we've got the Enigma machine.
Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, former NATO commander, thank you very much indeed. Good to speak to you.
Yep. I'll show you a couple of bits on the back here. So 3 weeks to go. We will be doing the testing within the UK at one of our national drone hubs. In the UK, in Maidenhead. Yep. Massive success story, recent growth. We've quadrupled our workforce. I went to the launch of it, got bored to death, so I've forgotten most of it. Area, so that will be helpful.
Do you see that you're working with them in new ways? Perhaps take a very good briefing just now. This is really the two nations absolutely interoperable. Because we see, and I called out a few weeks ago, the Russian spy ship Yantar in and out British waters. We know what they were doing. We tracked it every mile of the way. But it is Russia mapping, surveying, and in times of conflict with the capacity to sabotage critical pipes, networks that our country depends on. And if we want to keep ahead of our adversaries, if we want to give our British Navy, with allies like the Norwegians, the edge on the battlefield, the edge on deterrence, then we have to combine the new technology that we saw today to be able to track, to be able to find, and if necessary, to be able to respond to the threats that we may face in the future. You're heading Where's Hope?
Cardiff.
Yeah.
I can see it. Yeah, I can see that, yeah.
How long has it been service?
It's 4.5 years.